And welcome back to Pokemon Team Creation Series. Today's Pokemon Team Creation Series request comes to us from actually two sources. Daniel F. And this was actually originally it was one of my personal suggestions. I have my own personal list when I get around to it in the pages. But then I looked through it and I'm like, oh wait, Daniel F. also suggested this. So, Jack the Reaper from Ragnarok. Me and my girlfriend finally got into Ragnarok about a couple months ago. And we actually, season one, a lot of people kind of rag on season one. Season one was fine. The best part of it definitely was the Poseidon, I can't remember his name, but that fight. But then we got to season two, which was a big step up. And we got the Jack the Ripper fight versus Hercules. And that was awesome. And Jack the Ripper was a really interesting character. I can see why he's a fan favorite among the Ragnarok cast that's been shown so far. Him, I know him, I got the Swordsman, Buddha, and Tesla are among some of like the fan favorites among the overall cast. But yeah, and trust me, when he starts just singing the London Bridge is breaking down, breaking down. Even my girlfriend's going like, whoa. But no, they really did a good job of actually making a unique version of Jack the Ripper. And if you look into it, he's actually not the original Jack the Ripper, but he adopted it and said he could have been based on all the terrible things he did. But he actually isn't the original of Jack the Ripper, apparently. But that said, he's still a very capable individual, very powerful. And unique as well. So let's get into this. Anyone who's hitting on this video, A, knows Pokemon, and B, knows the series Ragnarok. So I don't need to really go into any backstory or anything like that. So right out the gate, let's just get the holdover from last week. I mentioned this would happen, but there was a holdover from last week's team, and that is Gardevoir. Now, the reason for this is Jack is born with a very unique ability to see emotion as a color, I can't remember if it's like an aura or if somebody's body is just like radiates the color from like within. But when I think of a Pokemon that can do that with emotion, there are they're all psychic types mostly. But there are several Pokemon that stand out when it comes to emotion. I mean, honestly, I could have even gone with, which one was the emotion Pokemon? Mesprit, Azelf, and Uxie. Uxie, I believe, was knowledge. I think it's Uxie, Azelf, and I think it's Mesprit's the emotion one. Either way, I could have gone Mesprit, but I've already got a couple pretty powerful Pokemon on here. One kind of legendary. We'll get to that when we get to that. I didn't really feel the need, but given the fact you're in Ragnarok, you could easily make the excuse for legendaries on the team, like a lot of them, and it wouldn't be that out of the realm of possibility. But Gardevoir is definitely one that is very much wrapped in emotion. They're drawn to emotion as Ralts and Kirlia, and even furthermore as Gardevoir. But they're also just very powerful, too. Beyond that, though, it's a very feminine Pokemon, and Jack's relationship with women is well known. But I could see this being like the Pokemon he actually views in a high regard. That, this is one that treats him right, that he can see the emotion on its face, and he just finds that because he learned from Hercules the true love actually looked like, emotion-wise, and he realized how beautiful that was. So I liked Gardevoir on the team. Between his past history, the emotional sensing, and the fact that Gardevoir is just a good Pokemon. Beyond that, too, this and the one Mon we have on here to represent the, Divine Weapon, I think we'll just call it, because I know it has a name, but I can't remember. The Divine Weapon. We can use this also to represent the Valkyrie, it turns into his Divine Weapon. Now, beyond that, though, I did also have another Mon on this team. Now, this was a filler Mon. Mostly. There's one reason I did put it on there. That's Thieval. Now, Jack is a murderer. He's not a thief. But it's a dark type. Jack is still a murderer. And if I'm going to be honest, look at that mustache. Look at that mustache, look at that mask, and tell me you don't, and look at the look on his face, and tell me you don't get a bit of the Jack vibe coming off that Thieval. That Thieval is really all about the Jack right now. So yeah, I put Thieval on there. It's a Galar Pokemon. Galar is based off the UK. So I did feel like it made a lot of sense to have another Galar Pokemon on the team. Because the next one that ended up on the team does go to his idea of being at least somewhat gentlemanly, and goes to the scene where he's having tea before Hercules shows up. And that's Polteageist. And it works actually on a few levels, particularly when we get to another one on the team who it also works with. Because Jack, just like everyone else, is technically not alive. Jack is a soul. He died. And he's in like heaven or the afterlife or whatnot. But yeah, he's not technically a living being. None of the humans in Ragnarok technically are. They have an afterlife. They can live in the afterlife, technically, for all eternity, as far as we know, or until the end of time. But we also know they can die a death beyond their standard death. And I just liked a little ghost teapot right there. And there's Jack right there. Beyond that, though, we do need something to represent his affinity, let's call it, for sharp things. Blades, particularly blades, but, the piano wire, the giant scissors. Jack is a master strategist. He's a great tactician, able to defeat Hercules with his strategic knowledge, including his use of blades, particularly. So what blade can we use? Well, a lot of times I like to do Hone Edge, but Hone Edge, the best Hone Edge could represent would be the scissors that he used. I need something that kind of just represents blades in general. And luckily, we have a Pokemon that's more or less made up of blades, and that's Bisharp. When you look at this thing, really look at Bisharp. Count how many blades are actually on this thing. Technically, those middle blades are one single blade, but if you want to count each hook, those 4 blades right there. Then you get the big sharp blade on his head, the point on the back of his head, that's 6. He's got 2 blades coming off his shoulders. You bet your ass those hands are probably blades too, or at least close enough to it. So that's at least 10 right there. His feet also look very sharp. This isn't even talking about King Gambit, which I didn't want to go King Gambit. King Gambit I feel fit. But point being is that Bisharp, I think, works very well. It's a steel type, blades all over its body, which Jack is just armed to the teeth in many ways, but also a dark type to represent the darkness and malice in him. Beyond that, similar to Polteageist, I had another ghost type on the team that represented this, and that was Decidueye. Now, Decidueye, I'll be honest, comes off more from the aesthetic appeal similar to Thieval. It does share the ghost type attribute with Polteageist, and therefore it lends itself to the fact that Jack is a soul at this point in the series, not a living individual, at least in the standard sense. But beyond that, its design just kind of screams Jack in many ways. He's cloaked. He's got a cape. He hides his face with a hood in this case, but with a hat. Granted, we know Decidueye is a bit more off like a Robin Hood type, but this still works. Also, Decidueye, and I could have also gone a Hisuian variant of this, which in theory could have worked a little better as it's a more physical fighter, being a fighting type, but it's still capable of learning Leaf Blade, which, Leaf, a blade, hey, there you go. Capable of firing arrows, which we know Jack doesn't carry arrows, but can think on the fly. Used, what did he use? He used a spike on a fence as a weapon. So Jack could still, you can still see a Decidueye working relatively well for Jack. But I knew this last one was going to be the most difficult one to figure out, because I knew anytime I'm going to do a Record of Ragnarok character, and that's on my personal list. If we talk about personal lists, like the characters series I like, I have Bleach, I have Naruto, I have My Hero Academia, I have Godzilla. What else do I know I got like 1 or 2 other things, but I now added Record of Ragnarok because I actually really enjoy Record of Ragnarok. So whenever I get around to doing a Record of Ragnarok character, particularly the human side, I'm going to have to figure out a Pokemon that represents their divine weapons. Some of these divine weapons are pretty easy. Lu-Bu had a big spear. Again, I can't remember his name. I'm going to get it right now. The swordsman, the history's greatest loser, Record of Ragnarok. Hold on. History's greatest loser. Let's see here now. Where is... I want to say it's like Sasakibe or something like that. Oh, okay, hold on. Record of Ragnarok, the volume 3, which is the volume I'm thinking of, has the fight with has the fight with Poseidon And Jesus, just being slow. Okay. Point being, it has the history great. He had 2 swords, or he had a sword that could be 2 swords, which I could easily represent was like a double blade or something like that. Just thinking real quick. Adam had a knuckle duster. In the anime, we haven't gotten to the Buddha fight. We will most likely be getting to that later on with the second half of season 2. There's only 5 episodes. We haven't gotten to the Hades Kishuan, or I can't remember the history's first emperor. Okay, the human side. Here we go. Where are they? Around where? There we go. Kojiro Sasaki. That was the name of the guy. I knew it was an S, but I thought the S was his first name. But anyway, Kojiro Sasaki. Raiden, the world's greatest sumo. He had some sort of thing that kind of hindered his muscles from basically exploding because he was like so ungodly strong. Anyway, so some of those are easy to do for a Pokemon. Hell, swords, that's easy. I got Hone Edge, Double Blade, and Aegislash to go for swords. Spears, more difficult, but I can still figure it out. How do you create a Pokemon that is to represent a pair of gloves that can turn anything they touch into a divine weapon? That's tricky. I ultimately came down to this, and you'll notice on this team, I haven't talked about the kind of legendary on the team. Well, here we are. And the kind of legendary who's basically on the team is Silvally. Now, why? And we're just going to make sure he's front and center for this. Now, why Silvally? Well, first off, he is a mock version of Arceus. Let's be honest. That's exactly what he is. Because his ability is called the RKS system. Come on. But beyond that, I believe Silvally's stats don't go up a lot upon evolution, but and I believe he's technically considered like a legendary, technically, although that might be up for interpretation. Wrong one. I don't want Mighty-Or, I want Silvally. 1 second here, and we're just gonna go back one. There we go. I'm getting Silvally's stats up here right now in terms of where he stands stat-wise. Stat-wise, he comes out at 570. Yeah, so he's got a paradox-based stat total. By the way, another thing to just admit, because I remembered now why I chose Decidueye. Through technical machines, Decidueye can use acrobatics, which is a very unique, very powerful attack, and Jack was a very acrobatic individual. I knew there was another reason I put Decidueye on the team. But beyond that, though, because Decidueye can basically, just like Arceus, be any type, I felt that is the best way to represent a weapon that can turn anything into a weapon. So basically, if whatever you need at the time, I mean, granted, you have to put the disc in and all that, but you also have to touch something with the gloves to turn it into a weapon. So I think it works in concept. Stat-wise at least, it's his strongest Pokemon. But that now begs the question: how balanced, in the end, is this team? And that question becomes a little bit of depends on what type you make Silvally. So, but real quick, before we talk about any type change that we do with Silvally, what do we have for typing on this team? Well, we have 2 dark types, we have 2 ghost types, we have 1 steel type, 1 grass type, 1 psychic, 1 fairy, and 1 normal type. Now, if you look at that actually is not terribly balanced. Half the team does struggle very much with fighting types, but a third of the team does have a problem with dark types. But beyond that, except for maybe an odd fire type move here or there for both Decidueye and Bisharp, there's not much of an issue here. I mean, also half this team has immunities all over the board. You got one who's immune to dragons. Silvally, just as a normal, is immune to ghost. Bisharp's immune to poison. You have 2 Pokemon that are immune to both normal and fighting types. So there's actually a lot going on in this team that does work on some level. Now again, the fighting and a bit of the fire and dark, that is a bit of an issue. Not gonna lie, it is a bit of an issue. Also, Decidueye and Gardevoir do have a slight issue against poison types, fairy and grass both being weak to those. But now let's honestly just play the game here. Let's play the game for a second. Seeing as we're pretty much done with the video, let's play the game and talk about how balanced this is depending on which version of Silvally you're using. So if Silvally, and actually this probably won't be as fast or as long as you think, because some of these types don't really add or take away anything from the weakness structure of the team. So if we're going, and I'm just going by the Cerebi row here. If Silvally's a bug type, that means he has a weakness to fire types, if I'm not mistaken, to rock types, and flying types, if I'm not mistaken. That doesn't change anything here. So there you go. That also gives the team an extra resistance to dark types. If he's a dark type, well, now you've actually added a big fighting weakness to the overall team. Granted, and I forgot, dark type is also immune to psychic, so that's another immunity. He's got immunity to psychic, but that also then adds a weakness to bug. That's a Decidueye also partially. Granted, the ghost type helps negate that a little bit, but that Decidueye also technically shares. And Thieval. So actually, adding dark type is not, you don't want your Silvally on this team to be a dark type. What about making him a dragon type? Well, now you only have a weakness to ice, which doesn't really affect anyone but Decidueye. You got a weakness to fairy, which, that is true. Fairy does have a bit of a, they're actually not a big problem. Only Thieval's really straight up weak to fairy. And then dragon. So dragon isn't a bad typing. What about electric? Well, electric only actually has one legit weakness, and that's ground. Now, Bisharp is weak to ground because of the steel typing, but other than that, it's not that big a deal. And it adds for a lot of attack variety. How about fairy? Another fairy on the team. Well, now you're just doubling down on the weakness to poison a little bit. And in fact, he's pure fairy, so that does add a problem. But other than that, though, it helps negate a little bit of the weakness to ghost that the two ghost types do have. So there is that, I suppose. Well, what about fighting? There is no fighting type on the team. Fighting's weaknesses are flying and psychic and fairy. And nothing on this team really has a clear-cut weakness to that except for Thieval. That's it. So except for Thieval, that's all you're really dealing with. Yeah, Decidueye has a mild grass weakness, but just mild, or flying weakness. Sorry. And again, it's mitigated thanks to Ghost. What about making him a fire type? I have no fire types on this team, and their only weaknesses are rock, ground, and water. There is no weakness to water on this team whatsoever. There's no real weakness to rock either on this team. The only weakness you kind of have is ground, and the only one who really suffers from that is, again, Bisharp. So, honestly, fire's not a bad one to do. How about flying? Don't have a flying type on this team. So, flying is interesting because its weaknesses, if I'm not mistaken, are rock, ice, and electric. Nothing else on this team has an electric weakness. Nothing else on this team has a rock weakness. And except for Decidueye having a mild weakness, to, which is, again, somewhat negated by the extra typing, nothing has a weakness to Ghost, and you gain an immunity to ground with a flying Silvally. So, honestly, at the moment, having your Silvally be a flying type could be the best version of Silvally for this team. But what if we make it a Ghost type? Well, catch-22. You're now adding another Pokemon with 2 immunities, but now you're making this team a lot weaker to dark types. And a lot weaker to straight-out Ghost. So I probably wouldn't go Ghost. What about grass? Well, pure grass? Fire, bug, ice, flying. While grass types are normally my go-to, I acknowledge they're not very good unless you give them a secondary typing. And even then, most aren't that good. Just straight grass would not do well on this team just because we already have fire, bug, fire, and flying alone. And ice. All of these guys add weaknesses to the team. Okay, then let's talk about ground. What about ground? Ground's weaknesses are water, grass, and ice. And honestly, none of those except for ice have any sort of bearing on this team. So right now, and again, only mildly. So right now you're looking at either a flying or a ground type Silvally for this team. How about ice itself? What about that? Well, The problem with ice is that is a glass cannon type. It's dangerously weak to both fighting and rock, and weak to water, if I'm not mistaken. So what does that? But does that matter on this team overall? Well, actually, except for the fighting, not really. Now, granted, with the fighting, that's half your team weak to fighting. Well, what about poison? Poison's big weaknesses are steel, ground, if I'm not mistaken, and psychic. And this nothing on this team except for Gardevoir really has a steel weakness, which is good. The ground, now you're doubling up on the weakness you have with Bisharp. The psychic, not really an issue. So poison isn't a god-awful type to choose for this. But then there's psychic itself. Unfortunately, with psychic, you have both a bug weakness and a ghost weakness. And unfortunately, with that one, you have 3 mon on this team already who are weak to a ghost as it is. And then you got mon on this team that are weak to bug. And then you got mon on this team that are weak to dark. So psychic would not be the type you want to go with. How about rock? Well, rock is weak to fighting. It's weak to ground. And if I'm not mistaken, it's weak to steel. If I'm not mistaken, it's weak to. Again, fighting in the ground alone, that I wouldn't go with rock. Last two, water and steel. Steel's weaknesses are fire, fighting, and ground. Again, the fighting weakness. And then ground weakness, and then the fire weakness. Again, Decidueye might have the ghost to help a little bit, but it's still not good. So last but not least, there's water, which is normally just weak to grass and electric. And that one actually isn't a bad option, because there's nothing else here that really gets hurt by grass and electric very much on this team. Everything is pretty much just dealt neutral damage, or it resists it like Bisharp does. So if you're asking me which Silvally to use on this team, and maybe anytime I put a Silvally on there, maybe I'll end the video just by going down the rabbit hole on that. Your choices, I think, are going to be either a water, a flying, or a ground type. If you were to ask me, I'd go the flying type, because it doesn't share any of the other weaknesses these other guys have, and it has an extra immunity on the team. That is just my thoughts, though. What would you do differently if you would do anything differently for Jack the Reaper? Or would you not? Do you love this team? Let me know in the comments below. But until then, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Later.